that we have. We also record these sessions for our archives, and so people can listen later. So, so you're aware of that. Tonight, our session with Phil Poynor and Susan Parson is also being hosted by AOPA. Chris Moser is with us, and as soon as I can find, wow, we have a lot of participants tonight. Chris, I'm looking for you so I can unmute you. So I'm just going to open up all the mics. And if there's too much background noise, well, Chris, I will introduce you here in just a moment. There you are. Chris, are you with us?
I am. Nice to be with you, Bob.
Very good. Chris is what's your title again? I apologize. Getting caught up here.
No problem. Yeah, I'm the Program Manager for Flight Training Initiatives at AOPA. So basically what I do is I'm in charge of basically initiatives that we're working on at AOPA to promote flight schools and increase the pilot population. So things like Rusty Pilots, and I'm working on a customer service program too. So basically we're here to try to help out, do what we can for CFIs and flight schools.
Excellent. And Phil, I'm going to find you here on the list. We have 182 participants tonight, which is a record for NAFI. That's really very, very heartening. So, Phil, if you'll just bear with me a moment. Or, Phil, you should be able to unmute yourself. Why don't you introduce yourself? And we're going to have to find Phil on the list. Bear with me one moment. This is the most we've had, and while I'm going through this, if everybody would mute your own microphones on your handsets or your computers or however you've come in, that would be a big help, and that way I can open up the microphones and be a little bit freer here. Phil is our Vice President of Industry and Government Relations, and Phil, you're unmuted. And Phil, why don't you introduce yourself? There you are, Phil. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. I guess that's your screen up now.
Yep.
And where did you want me to start, Bob? We've gotten a little disconnected here.
Well, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself while I promote your screen to the presentation, and also find Susan on this wonderful list that we have.
She's way down at the bottom. I saw her there.
Okay, great. Anyway, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself while I promote the screen to you, and then I'll introduce Susan.
Okay. My name is Phil Poynor. I'm former chairman of the board of NAFI and longtime board member, although not currently on the board. I stepped down a couple years ago from the board to take over the volunteer role of Vice President of Government Industry Affairs. Background in flying is about 11,000 flight hours, did a fair amount of 135 work, but most of it's been in training. I owned a large flight school in Long Island, operated about 48 airplanes at our peak, and have taught at 3 different aviation universities, or two universities and 1 college. Retired from that now and doing most of the work volunteering with NAFI and particularly on the ACS project with Susan.
And Phil's done human work for us. And Phil, do you know if Susan came in over a cell phone, or did she come in over?
I thought I heard her. I thought I heard her talking in the background there.
Susan, are you with us? I don't believe so.
Because I heard a voice that sounded like hers. Bear with me. I don't see her there now. I saw her a minute ago.
Well, we'll continue on. Let me tell everybody a little bit about Susan and Phil. You should have been, while you're talking, the screen should have handed over to you.
Okay, there we go. Although I don't.
There you are.
It It's on that slide for some reason, so another technical. We'll hope it moves from here. This is the first screen, I believe, in the presentation. Bear with me a second.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, all right. Well, let me talk about Susan for a moment. Susan Parson is AFS 3A at the FAA, which is Special Technical Assistant to the Director of FAA Flight Standards Service. She manages the Director's communications. She's the editor of the FAA Safety Briefing magazine and is the lead FAA representative for the ACS project. Okay.
I hear her in the background.
Susan, are you with us?
There she is. Can I unmute her, or do you have to?
Is she under?
Susan Kirsten Parson.
Okay, we'll find that. I don't see her on the list. I apologize, everybody. Again, this is the largest number of people we've had.
And Bob, it's Chris. I do see Susan down towards like about the last third of the as I was scrolling down.
Okay.
And definitely hear her talking in voice in the background. She's got a pretty distinctive voice.
Yeah. I don't know if she can hear us or not. Susan? Oops.
Even after giving birth, after the C-section, that was the first thing you did because you need to get up and walk a little bit every day and the catheter, yeah. Good.
Susan, can you hear us? I've unmuted your mic. Phil, I'm going to ask you if you could text her.
I just did.
Oh, okay. I don't think she's aware she's live here. And Phil, can you tell you what? Text me her cell phone number just in case she came in that way.
Okay.
Sorry about this. We got a little bit of a late start, and again, this is an unprecedented number of participants. So we apologize. We were used to about a third of this size.
I got back from her, Bob, that I'm on cell. She hears us.
Okay. If you would text me your cell phone number, that would be wonderful. That way I can find her on the list.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought she came in over the internet connection. That's where.
Yeah, I see your name in the list of the phone calls, so.
Yeah, the difficulty is she dialed in separately. That's the issue.
I see.
So if you text me that real quickly, I can take care of it.
Pull it out so I can get it to you.
Yeah. Did you? Yeah, are you sending that to my cell phone, Phil?
Yep, just sent it.
Okay. Okay. There we go. Thank you.
for a really good day. His last day is Tuesday. He has a half day on Tuesday.
Susan, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. We apologize for the technical glitch. And again, Susan Parson has very graciously joined us to talk about the new ACS. And folks, we're a little late starting because of a technical hang-up there. And no more apologies. Phil and Susan, you've got control of the show. I'm going to step back and let you guys start talking.
Okay. Let's make sure we're connected. How are you tonight, Susan?
I'm good.
Okay.
Right now I'm looking at a blank screen, so I assume you'll bring up the PowerPoint.
Let's see, Bob, are you saying I've got my PowerPoint up?
We've got the, yeah, I see the PowerPoint. Interesting.
You're not seeing the PowerPoint?
That's okay.
Susan?
I know if it's the same one we worked on, I know what it says, so don't worry about it. I got you.
Okay. And I'll kind of give you a clue. Right now, somehow we skipped past the opening slide, and it's blocked out. I'm on slide 2. And
okay.
So I'll go through those first, the why what we're doing, and then you can go through the why it's better. So first, I'd like to thank everybody showing up tonight. It's a really large crowd and very pleased, a lot more than either we planned or were prepared for. We'll be talking tonight about a couple of things with the ACS. First is to give you some background about what's happening, an introduction to that, and then Susan will go through quite a bit of the rationale and the reasoning behind it. I'd also like to invite everybody, based on the turnout, I think most of you probably are aware that we are publishing a series of articles in eMentor. They'll be appearing more or less every 2 or 3 weeks. I've got a schedule mapped out that will take us all the way out till the ACSs get implemented in June. And we're also publishing articles in Mentor, as well as holding this webinar, and we'll be holding webinars at Sun and Fun and probably at Oshkosh as well. Anyway, what this approach does is, in going back about 4 years ago, NAFI and a couple of the larger schools had gotten word from a number of the instructors and students that almost overnight the pass rate in the flight instructor rating had dropped, the first-time pass rate, from about 90% down to 50%. And it raised the issue, well, what's going on here? And of course, I think a lot of us thought, well, that's easy. The FAA changed the test questions and people are memorizing the answers. But we thought we ought to delve into it a little bit more than that. To make a long story short, put together a meeting with a number of people at the FAA and AFS 630 that does the testing, or do the testing, along with AOPA and NAFI were the 2 major industry leaders, and Embry Riddle was there, and a few other people. And we went through it. It turned out that, yes, they had updated the questions, but the problem turned out not to be so much that people didn't have it from rote memory, but rather that a number of the questions really didn't relate to any of the material in the study guides. And it's kind of hard to pass a test if you didn't know that that subject was going to be on it. So long story short, that went through a process of evaluation between industry and the FAA, and ARAC was established to task to review the way testing was done, particularly the knowledge testing. And out of that came this Aviation Certification Standards Working Group to develop the idea that we needed something that told us in advance what the body of knowledge and the aeronautical knowledge was, similar to what we had in flight proficiency in the practical test standards. One of the things that struck me interesting, and is kind of embarrassing being a lawyer, that I never thought of it this way, but when we first sat down in the first meeting I was in, Susan had pointed out how the practical test standards items come straight out of the FAR. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. And once I understood that, it was like, wow, now I get it. Now I understand how all this stuff links together. And we had never done that mapping on the knowledge test side, so there was never any kind of corresponding relationship. So what is the ACS? This is a picture of one of them, the Performance Standards 5, Area of Operations 5, Task Steep Turns. This area, flight proficiency, is mapping in to the ACS, is the skills section. But based on what I just said about the PTS, this is carried over in almost every case verbatim from the PTS. In a couple of places, the numbers are rearranged slightly, but the content of this part of the ACS should be familiar to anybody that's been doing flight training, instructing, or evaluation, examining, because it's carried over exactly from the PTS. And what it does is lay out the standard as to what you're expected to do on the test. The new sections are up here in the aeronautical knowledge, where in the same way that we developed for the skills, we've developed a statement of the knowledge and what you're expected to learn. So if you were going into a test, either a knowledge test to do the written or on a practical test for your evaluation, this is the knowledge to be expected to be able to answer questions about. And you can see that it's fairly specific, and that's going to be one of the really big improvements over the previous system where you really didn't know what to study. It was just the old, well, study the whole book. Well, here you need to study the whole book, but you have an idea of what you need to focus on for the testing. The third area combines several different things. We had begun to put aeronautical decision making and risk management into the practical test. That had been showing up over the last 3 or 4 years. In addition, there were a number of special emphasis items that had been in the PTS. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, these are the items that get interjected by various interests. One of the largest is NTSB, where they'll make a safety recommendation that says they recommend to the FAA that they provide additional training and testing on, and then we'll specify a subject. For those of you that remember the old GPS questions that were pretty amazing, they came in at the time the NTSB did their first investigations about what I think a number of the folks there in an industry called the VFR, direct to the scene of the crash accident, which is where somebody would load up one of the early GPS, not get a briefing or any flight planning, and just put it straight to a destination and go get some weather and hit something. And out of that training, the NTSB had recommended that there be, or out of those accidents, the NTSB had recommended that the FAA do testing on GPS. And you may remember the questions that got into the test bank. They were all the same question, just asked different ways. And it was, how many satellites are there? And the answer was 24 satellites and 3 in-earth orbit spares. And even that answer was only accurate for a few weeks because the Air Force was constantly launching satellites and taking satellites out of service. So it really was a ridiculous question, but it was trying to respond to the NTSB request on decision making, or a special emphasis on it. So this is what the ACS looks like. That's what the 3 sections are. The big improvement, or one of the big improvements, is this new coding system over here on the right side.
Phil, I'm going to interrupt for just one moment.
Sure.
We're getting comments that people can't. We've got so many people on,
Okay.
and I'm working to up the. As we speak, I'm working to change our subscription, but this presentation will be available and the slides will be available for everybody later. We'll make sure that they're available so everybody knows. So bear with me for one moment while I take care of that. But in the meantime, so everybody knows, this presentation will be available later, and also the slideshow.
Okay. Did you start to say something, Susan?
I was just wondering if that's why I can't see the screen. I assume it is, but I've got the slides, so I'm okay.
That's correct, and I'm working to change it as we speak.
So do you want me to wait to present, Bob, until you finish that?
Nope, keep going. I just want to let everybody know.
Okay. So the slide that's been pulled up now is the same slide we were just looking at, and we've emphasized the coding. Those of you that have either taken tests or been an instructor reviewing a test, or an examiner, evaluator who had to do a retest and had to retest on items, when you want to know an area that a student had missed a question on, or had perhaps failed a practical test on, you had these learning standard codes, but they're next to useless. They were so imprecise as to what they led to. They would just be a very, very broad statement that would say, like, radio navigation. And then I don't know about your experience, but my experience as an instructor is I never had anybody fail a flight test, fortunately, but I certainly had to review a bunch of written tests. And you would sit down with the student and say, okay, well, I see here you missed whatever standard code that's radio navigation. What question did you have? Oh, I don't remember. I don't remember a question on that. Well, do you have a VOR question? No, I didn't have a VOR question. And we'd go back and forth like that about a half a dozen times, and you'd both realize that you were getting nowhere. So you would, at least what I would do is sort of generally discuss the couple of different kinds of radio navigation that might have been on the test, and then move on. And I don't know, I never found it personally that it really did much toward improving the quality of the student, but we had to do it according to the FAR because it says you have to review that. Under these new standard codes, we've joked that the goal of this is pretty much to drive you right down to the paragraph in the guidance document. Now, that's probably a little bit too big a claim, but you'll see when we go through it, it is pretty precise as to where it's going to take you. So referring to this in the knowledge section, let's say you and your students sat down to review the questions missed on the knowledge test, and you saw a knowledge code PA5, AK5. What that means is it's directing you that it's to the private pilot airplane test. That tells you which ACS you're going to be using. It tells you that it's area of operations 5, performance maneuvers. The task is task A, steep turns. The knowledge element is K5, so you come down to knowledge, K5, accelerated stalls. So now you know specifically that the question they missed on the knowledge test was about accelerated stalls. I think that alone to me is what has me excited that this is going to be a big improvement over the existing PTS system. Any questions on that before I go on? Because this is one that may have some questions and is really a very important point. Okay.
Phil, before you go on,
Right.
I just changed the subscription, and people are starting to say they're getting the video. So, and I just checked it on my iPad. So, just wanted to let you know that.
Then let me, since we're here, let me hold on this slide. This is the only one where you really needed to see the slide. So let me hold here, and I'll go really quickly through what I just said. This is what's out of the PTS. Uh-oh, I thought I would do that. And for some reason, it's not letting me go back. Well, like Bob said, it'll be up on the web. Who helped develop this? This is a list of some of the people. There are a number of other folks that have participated as well. But you can see OPA, NAFI, a bunch of airline companies, the Airlines for American, the old Air Transport Association, several pilot unions. Airline Pilots was one. There were others, Coalition of Airline Pilots. I think APA had reps at one point. We have a number of professional organizations, Aviation Accreditation Bureau International. They do the accreditation of the college programs. We have a number of major training facilities, CAE, for example, that's the largest flight school in the world. I wasn't aware of that before I started this and found out the number of not just large simulator schools they run, but private on up. So a whole array of folks. You can see a number of the publishers of questions, GLIAM, Jepson, ASA, and a wide variety of people. So one of the criticisms we've heard as we've been developing this from several sources as well, it's just a bunch of FAA people and industry guys that sit behind a desk and don't know what they're doing. Interesting enough, one of the publications called out a specific complaint and said, well, yeah, and I wonder what this educational psychologist knows about flying. Well, to answer that specific question, she's an retired airline captain, ATP, type rated in the 7576, MD-80, the YS-11, and a couple that I don't remember, and she's currently an examiner and flies 135 in the Caribbean and a Grumman Goose, and by the way, has a PhD in educational psychology. So I won't say we all have quite that level of expertise, but there's a lot of talent here, certainly on the industry side, and to give the credit, because a lot of times I think the FAA doesn't get, or not what they don't get, they do get knocked that they don't know what they're doing in aviation. And the folks that I've worked with to a person are very knowledgeable, dedicated, and really working hard. It's been a pretty phenomenal working group. I think this, Susan, was where we had planned for you to start talking about the house it better, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, I think Phil has already started with a couple of the ways that it's better, but one of the things that we're aiming to do is provide a better presentation. I've certainly taught students in a variety of ways, and I did a degree in education, and one of the things that we learned was that it really is important for people, especially adults, to understand why we're asking them to learn something. And we all know, those of you who saw it on an earlier slide, that we've had a lot of disconnected questions over the years. So this provides what, as the slide says, a holistic approach to standards, guidance, and testing. We'll talk about that a little bit in a second. But the better feedback, as Phil talked about, better test questions, shows everybody how everything fits together. But when I talk about the standards, guidance, and testing, the holistic approach, the codes that Phil just explained, those can be used to map guidance. So the ACS is the standard, and the test questions are being mapped to the standard, and we're also doing the same thing with guidance. So the system works together in a way that it never has before. So you can go on to the next one.
Okay.
Another piece of it, I don't know about you all, but I know that in all the PTSs that I have used over the years, that there is an awful lot of material in the front before you get to what you really care about, which is what do I have to do and how do I have to, what standard do I have to train to? Well, that often overlooked material, what we have done with the ACS approach, we've shortened the introduction and we've taken the material and organized it substantially differently with, so it's hard to see on this slide, on this presentation, but we've got appendices, so it starts with a knowledge test, eligibility, test procedures, et cetera. So there's information that is presented in a more accessible way. I like to think of it as this is knowledge when you need to know it, when you need to know what do you have to do, what are the applicant responsibilities for the practical test, you'll know where to go instead of diving through lots and lots of pages of somewhat fragmented material. As Phil already explained too, that long list of special emphasis areas in the introduction, there will not be any more quote unquote special emphasis areas, because what the group has done is taken those areas and put them in the right context in the risk management section. So I think this is there's a lot of safety of flight material that's all been put together. So the whole idea is just to make this a lot more usable than it ever has been before. And go on to the next one.
Okay, and before we do, Bob, are you getting any questions? Susan, I hadn't talked about this, but what we do, Susan, is occasionally questions come up, we'll stop and take them. So do you have any at this point, Bob?
Yeah, Jonathan Silva asked a great question. How will this, or will the coding also integrate or go back to the pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge? And I'll assume for all of the ACSs, will they go back to the appropriate handbook as well as the test coding?
Well, there's a huge effort going on right now to map the codes together with the standard codes and the guidance together. So the working group has already done a first pass, and they have made sure that all the material that is being presented as the standard in the ACS, that material is also is accommodated somewhere. The working group has made some very substantial recommendations for updating the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, Airplane Flying Handbook, and Risk Management Handbook, and several others that we'll talk about shortly. In the editions that we're planning to put out in June of 2016, those recommendations will be reflected. Over the longer term, I think what we're looking to do is go to a more data-driven approach where the coding will be linked more specifically to the guidance, but we can't get there in one step. So we're moving in that direction. We're confident that everything is covered, but the perfect lineup is several years down the track, if that answers the question.
To give a little more background on the detail of it that I think folks might appreciate as well is in the working groups, we went through every ACS element and mapped it back into the guidance. We had to find that document in the guidance somewhere. And so the question, does it map directly back to the guidance? No, I don't think you'll ever see it saying found on page 42, but you'll certainly find a headline in the outline of the guidance that is pretty clear that if you get into that page or two, that's where it is. And part of that's because you don't want it to be just taking it right to the sentence or right to the 2 or 3 sentences that are the answer, or you get back to the rote memory. We're all in agreement on the committee, and it's universal that we don't want to go to rote level of testing. We want people to understand the material, but we need to direct you back closely enough. And so what Susan was saying is true, and we're pretty far along because we went through every question in the test bank, and we didn't do it by question. We did it by the subject statement, and mapped it back into the guidance, and then either recommended change to what the question was or recommended change in the various publications.
Just to be clear, Phil, because I know some people have been concerned about this too, that the integrity of the test questions. The industry group has not, with one exception, we have an industry person and industry stakeholder on the board, and we have a slide about that coming up. But the questions that the working group looked at in that process, they were the questions that a lot of the test prep providers have developed based on, their historical databases, and it's questions that count as sample questions. But we have had to be obviously careful about the actual test bank. So is that clear? I hope that clarifies that point.
I think it does. Thank you very much.
Okay, and that is an important point. I should have been more careful the way I was describing it. Indeed, we were working with the sample test, not the actual test, because it covered the same scope. Okay, you ready to go on to the next slide then? There we go.
I am.
It is there.
Okay, better test questions. I don't know about you all, but I can tell you that I was enraged after most of the knowledge tests I took, and I've done them. I've done a lot of them. You'll see on the slide, out of date. There are lots of NDB, not much RNAV. I hated the multiple interpolations, and that 2-knot difference in wind speed. I remember that one very painfully from my ATP written. Irrelevant, that height of blowing fan, that's a no kidding question that kills. And then obviously we found, the industry complained with reason that a lot of test questions were disconnected from the real skills and knowledge required for safe operation in the National Airspace System today. And that's what we're trying to fix. So the fact that we have a standard that now defines the knowledge that goes with the skills, and that also makes risk management something other than words, it's specific behaviors, that allows us to develop better test questions. So if you go on to the next one, I'm trying to remember what I had on the next one.
Okay, and before we go on that, I would point out that you've already seen the outcome of a lot of this stuff. You've seen the items about the NDB have been removed. Some of the navigation questions for out of date have been removed. So what we're doing is already affecting the exam system.
Yes, it is, and that's where we have what we call the ACS Exam Review Board. So this is a group that it includes. It used to be that test questions were developed and reviewed pretty much entirely in Oklahoma City. And it was one group of people, and nobody else was involved. Well, we're changing all of that. So now we have representatives from the Air Transportation Division, the Flight Technologies Division, from the General Aviation and Commercial Division, of course, Regulatory Support, me, and we have one outside stakeholder, a non-FAA representative who has extensive experience not just in aviation, but also in the what I call the dark art of testing, test question development and management. So we get together twice a week on a telephone conversation, and we go through questions, and we have a specific, unlike anything we'd ever done before, we have a very specific written process for how we review a question. That includes checking the references. It starts with, is this operationally relevant? So when we came to the question about what is the height of blowing sand, well, obviously, who cares? We didn't even bother to look for a code for it because it's not a useful question. So what we've been trying to do is we're working our way through the test banks so that we can get rid of the things that are just pointless. And one of our members came across a question. He decided to sit down and work the question. And it took him 3 hours to work one of these very complicated, multiple calculations questions. And that's on, what, a 2.5-hour test. So one of the questions we ask in the process of the review is, how long does it take to make this calculation? And if it's longer than 5 minutes, we change it, we fix it. So on the web page that we'll show you later in the presentation, there is a list of the items that the FAA has removed from the test question bank, and we continue to add to that all along. I got a couple of one of our colleagues sent me an egregious sample of 2 questions he had found and removed just today. So we have worked through all of the private and instrument questions that are currently on form tests being used. We're working on the ATP because, of course, the changes to that test meant that we needed to focus on that bank. We've done a little bit with commercial, but we haven't been able to get very far with that yet because we've had to switch into UAS. So we are working carefully, and we're spending at least an hour each telcon. We tried originally to do more than that, but we found that the level of focus and discussion is such that about an hour is all we can give to it and still have the quality that we want. So the way that I always put it to people, the test bank is already vastly better than it has ever been before, but not nearly as good as it ultimately will be when we have all the questions revised and we start developing new questions that are more sharply focused to the standard. So I'm very, very proud of the work that the industry folks have given us the foundation and the tools to be able to do something that really needed to be done.
And one fact that I learned by participating in this, Susan, that really blew me away was, I guess I'd been like a lot of instructors, when you see an out-of-date question or one that's got bad wording or something, it's like, well, why don't they change it? Why, how hard can it be to change the question? And one of the things that I learned is that AFS 630 is responsible for all the testing for 23,000 separate questions. And it's a group of, what, 6 people in that unit, Susan?
It's something like that, and I think there was also a lack of structure to do it, and so we have built that structure. We have like I said, we have a written process for how to review a question to make sure that we've covered all the ground, that we've reviewed the reference, that we've checked the wording, that we've checked the calculation, how much time it takes. But one of the most important questions we ask is, how would a pilot need this? How would somebody really need to know this? How would you use it? And we have tried to reframe questions to the greatest possible extent in terms of a scenario. And, not very long, but still, if we cannot put the pilot and say, for example, you are approaching the hold short line and you see this set of lights, what does it mean? If we can't say why you would need to know it, why do we have it?
And just speaking for myself, Susan and Phil, I think that's a great bit of progress that you've made. And working through 23,000 questions is an amazing task.
Well, we've made it through well over 3,000, and so what we're doing is we're starting with we've gone through all of the private pilot bank questions that are on existing form tests, and I can't remember how many of those there are. We have just finished going through those for instrument rating. And by the way, when I see these, I should specify, we're starting with airplane. I know that people fly all sorts of other things, but we have to start someplace. Our working group members are familiar with me saying it's like an elephant. Pick a spot, start chewing. When you're done with that, start with another. So we started where we thought that there would be the biggest impact. So we're using the airplane. So for private pilot airplane, instrument rating airplane, and now we're doing the ATP. Or we've come back to the ATP, and then the next one we'll move to is commercial. And CFI is a little bit further down the track because that ACS is still being developed.
And I can imagine it's probably the most complicated one once you get that far.
Yeah, one of the things that we're trying to do with the instructor ACS is to make it practical and to get away from all the rote memorization. There's some exciting stuff going on with revisions to the instructor handbook that the group is recommending. So that there's just a huge amount of work going on that you can't see it all yet, but I hope that you will start to see. You've already started to see some of it, but that's going to accelerate as we move.
And I know I was kidding you at Redbird when we talked about all this, and then I'll get off my soapbox, but I guess this means I no longer have to think about turning 90 degrees to the VOR.
That is correct.
Okay, I'll stop now.
And you will never, unless there's something we missed, and we have sort of an antiquated system right now that we're contracting to replace, but we have endeavored to get rid of ADF and NDB questions. I've found about 5 people who say they've ever seen a fixed card ADF. So we're not asking questions about those anymore.
To give an anecdote with that, to put a little levity in here and then move on. We've all had the question Bob was referring to about there are a couple of versions of it. It's mostly turn 90 degrees and measure the time that it takes to cross so many radials. And then you do some calculations about time to the station and so on. And I've never figured out where you would use that. I was watching the History Channel a few months ago, and there was a Navy pilot. This was a program that had been made back in the early 2000 period. And he had been a Navy pilot that deployed on the first carrier to leave Pearl Harbor after the bombing, or to leave for combat after the bombing at Pearl Harbor, and was on carriers through the entire war. And he came up and they started talking about dumb stuff they had to learn in flying. And he said, yeah, there's this one thing where we went out and we had to turn to the ship 90 degrees and we were supposed to figure out how long it took us, and we never used that. So we found out where it came from, and even they didn't know what it was for. So those questions are disappearing, and real accolades to both FAA and the working group at doing that.
I think there's about 200 people cheering right now as they hear this. Anyway, continuing on.
Okay, we're on to the computer test report.
Okay, so we still can't quite do this. Like I said, we're contracting for new test management services, which is not just the IT. That's actually a small part of it. Our test management services, the contracting process, is intended to acquire expertise in, again, what I call the dark art of asking questions, because part of the problem that the FAA's had over the years is that the people who were charged with writing questions, they did not have any special knowledge or training. And for those of you who might be involved in the education field, other than in other ways, it really is very complex. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we get expertise, and we'll have all that in a package. And then so the goal is that when you get a computer test report, and this is just a mocked-up version for illustration purposes, today you get the learning statement codes, which I didn't find them very helpful myself, and I suppose most people didn't. In the future, your computer test report will show the ACS codes, and they will guide you and your applicants and evaluators, whatever role you happen to be in, much more sharply to what knowledge the person really, what did you really miss? So I think this is it's a very exciting way to enhance training and ultimately safety, and also just absolutely to keep everybody honest. I can tell you from these twice-a-week telcons, we have a little rule: if we can't find an obvious task element code for a question, the default assumption is that the question doesn't belong there. We do say, well, is this something somebody really needs to know? Is this something that the working group just didn't think of? And we have occasionally added task element codes. But by and large, this ACS coding helps us very clearly determine whether or not a question belongs on the test. And eventually it's going to help everybody also make sure that if you miss something, you know exactly what it is you need to retrain.
Okay. Any questions, Bob? Bob, any questions coming in?
No.
This is Chris, actually.
Oh, Chris, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to one question I know that comes up that I've heard from a few schools too is they are wondering about if you could clarify, will the questions now be kept secret and or will they be public like they had been? I know from my background as a teacher, I kind of lean towards the side of the secret because I want people to learn for understanding, not for memorization.
Well, that's exactly the goal. So for a number of years, the FAA did publish the test questions. And then at some point, and I'm not familiar with the history of how or why, but I think there certainly is a general view among education people that you don't want to publish the exact test questions. And so the FAA stopped publishing them, but we all know that until recently, the FAA did not go back and change them. So a lot of the test questions that there are blogs about, because I didn't know there were until this process, a lot of those questions, they were exactly the same, but that's not the case anymore. We are making revisions and updates to every question we touch. Now, the way that one of our working group members puts it is that if you have studied and prepared and you use the sample test that the FAA and others provide, then you should be familiar with the look and feel of the question. But you shouldn't see the exact question for exactly the reason that Chris pointed out. But one of the reasons that, let me go back to the example that I gave you. So when one of our members worked a question and realized that it took him 3 hours to do it, and that was knowing the answer before he even started, if we give people questions that take too long to answer, or the ones that, if your pencil is too thick, you're going to get the wrong answer. If we give you questions like that, then your only defense as a rational human being is to memorize them. But we're getting away from questions like that. So we're trying to drive everything toward knowledge. And so it gets back to, just like you said, Chris, if you studied and learned the material, the questions should not be a problem. I came across one sample question where it wanted me to do triple interpolations across 3 badly rendered charts for numerical differences of about 1 or 2 degrees. And forget it. Those go away. They're gone. So hopefully what we're trying to drive toward is a world in which you won't need to memorize the questions to do well on the test.
Okay. And thanks, and I think that's a great thing too. Like I said, coming from a teacher's point of view, very much so that how important it is to get people to understand it. So I guess a follow-up question on that in the flight school business side too would be, how would you recommend for the flight school owners out there, the chief CFIs and everything, how should they adjust their ground schools and everything else? I mean, are we going to provide assistance or just sort of that angle, how they think it's going to affect them and their ability to prepare people for the written test?
Well, sure. First of all, the sample ACS or the current draft ACS for both private pilot airplane and instrument rating airplane, those are on the FAA webpage. They have been for a while. and if we update that, we repost it with every test cycle. So that would be the next update would be on the 15th of February. Right now on that web page, there are sample tests for private pilot airplane and instrument rating airplane. And they have not only the learning statement codes, but they also have the ACS codes. So, frankly, you know, I've taught my share of ground and flight training, and when I look at this, I think, wow, what a much better tool this gives me, because for every area of operation, now I understand. I can help me understand, but more importantly, help my student understand. This is the knowledge you need to safely perform this task. And as we like to say, the ACS provides a presentation of what you need to know, do, and consider for every operation, every area of operation and task. So I think what we are really trying to do is to communicate as much as we can, partly through webinars like this, and really grateful to NAFI and AOPA for hosting it. But we've been providing a lot of information, a lot more than ever before, on the AFS 630 webpage. So the whole idea is to give people as much advance notice and information as possible, so you can start learning about it and asking questions and thinking about how you would teach it. So actually, Phil, if you'll go to the next slide, I think that also answers part of the question.
Okay.
We have, I like to say that we've pressure tested the concept. We, on behalf of the working group, over the past, we've been at this for nearly 5 years now. On behalf of the working group, we have published the private instrument and an earlier version of the instructor ACS several times, actually, and received public comment that the working group then folded into their work. Sometimes it was, hey, what did you think about this? And sometimes it was, this can't be any good because I wasn't part of it. So it was kind of an interesting mix of comments. But one of the really exciting things, we've never done this before, but the FAA and the industry have worked together to prototype the private, first the private, and now we're prototyping the instrument rating ACS. We did private in Orlando, and we did, we're currently doing the instrument rating in Seattle and Orlando. And the feedback we're getting from everybody, applicants, instructors, evaluators, and the FSDO is totally, our Flight Standards District Office, they have been hugely supportive, both in Seattle and in Orlando, because they see this as being a much better approach that our industry colleagues have helped us develop. So what we found, and we're going to be asking some of these folks to help us develop guidance as we go forward, but what we found is that they find it very intuitive. I'm a big fan of Apple devices, and I remember the phrase that it just works. And I think for people with the ACS, there's a lot less guesswork involved. It's pretty clearly laid out, so it just works.
Okay. On to the next slide.
You want me to do this one, Phil?
Yeah, that one really, I think you're probably better
I can
spot
do that.
to do
Okay.
that one.
So we are working on all kinds of things. There are all sorts of moving parts here, and we're trying to keep everything in formation. So we think of everything in terms of standards, guidance, and testing. Those are the things that need to match up. So we have draft ACS documents for private pilot airplane, instrument rating airplane, commercial, and ATP. The instructor ACS is in development. All but ATP we have submitted for public comment. So the private and instrument are really about, they've gotten to the point they're about as far as we can take them in the developmental stage. We had hoped to move further with commercial, including the test question review. But as most of you have noticed, UAS is a pretty big deal right now. And so we are not able to use the industry's input on UAS right now because it's still in an open rulemaking. But we've used the ACS framework to develop the backbone of the eventual knowledge test that we'll have to have for UAS. So we've had to, and that's obviously a priority, and I'm so excited that rather than just developing a test out of thin air, the first UAS test will be developed to a standard that the industry, the ACS working group, has helped us develop the framework for. We've developed quite a bit with the ATP ACS, but that one, like the instructor one, is very complex. And one of the things we didn't want to do with ATP, because there was so much change in the world after the first officer qual rule came in and the test changed, we didn't want to create any additional confusion. So we've been hanging on to that one before we put it out for public comment. We want to make sure that everything is settled down from the previous change, and we're not going to cause any consternation. On the guidance, and we've mentioned already, the industry working group has reviewed all of these handbooks for us, including the Instrument Flying Handbook, Instrument Procedures Handbook, and all the test supplements. Many of those recommendations are being incorporated, given to the contractor, and incorporated in the next editions. I mentioned contracting for test management services, and at least twice a week we're using the ACS framework to review and revise test questions, and we are going to start developing new ones. But we had so many really bad ones we had to kill first that we figured it was better to start with revising and eliminating, and then we'll start developing new ones. So there's a lot going on, and there are an awful lot of people who are working very hard on this, both on the FA side and on the industry side. And it's great. It's very exciting.
And to give a little background, where it's been an eye-opener, I think, for a lot of the folks in industry, and it's also started to launch some discussions. One of the areas we were bumping against was when we were finding some conflicting guidance between the Instrument Flying Handbook and the Instrument Procedures Handbook. And when you delve into it, you find out the reason that is they're owned by two different parts of the FAA. The air carrier side owns the procedures, but the GA side owns the the Instrument Flying Handbook. And so it becomes a pretty interesting problem to try to get those two things to merge together, where the procedure is anticipated as what is being taught. And the really great thing is we had a telcon earlier this week with it. It's the Flight Technologies division that owns the Instrument Procedures Handbook. So a bunch of people who work on that one and on the Instrument Flying Handbook, we have gotten together several times to talk about what belongs where and how to make sure that everything matches up and that everybody's talking to each other again. So it's a big change from where everybody worked in their own little stovepipes. And I think that's been one of the real values of having the industry component too, because we, in most cases, don't even know about the structures and the interrelationships like that. And so we can ask dumb questions and just say, well, why don't we just change both books? And then that raises the question, well, because one's here and one's there, and then it's, okay, well, how do we make that happen? And so I think that's been fun to be watching that kind of process. The other area Susan mentioned that's a fairly lengthy process, more than anticipated probably when we started, the authorized instructor has a couple of issues. One is the structure of the existing system was fairly poor in terms of the guidance and the way things correlated. So there's been a lot of work with that on a percentage basis, more than on the private or the commercial or the instrument. But the other thing, incorporating risk management into the instructor book, is interesting, because one of the things that was good by having a working group with FAA and industry people on it was we developed that there's actually two kinds of risk management for an instructor. There's the risk management you need to teach to the student instructor, but there's also the risk management that the instructor needs to maintain inside the airplane. In other words, when you're teaching and playing the role of the student, but you're still in charge of the lesson. And so you've got that second layer layered on top of the content that you're teaching. And the difficulty with that we're working on, and we're getting there, but it's a lot of real detail, is trying to document how you would report that out in the codes and not create conflicting codes and so on. Yeah. So it's been a pretty challenging effort.
Before we move on, I'd like to pass on a question from a listener, and also, before I do that, I'm going to tell everybody, because we had some technical difficulties, at the start, we're not on a hard stop at 8 o'clock Central or 9 o'clock Eastern. We'll keep going if everybody wants to hang in there with us. And want to apologize again. We were a bit overwhelmed and very gratified at the number of people that showed up. Andrus, I'm going to make hash of the name. Andrus Sculty, I think, mentioned that he thought he saw the authorized instructor ACS out there as a draft, and he provides a website out to nata.aero. Is that something that that's not a draft? That's a developmental copy, or is that actually a draft that's out there, Susan?
It probably is the copy that is part of the. We've had several working groups, several successive working groups. The last one, their charter ended in September of 2013, and there's something like a 517-page report, and a lot of those 517 pages include copies of the private instrument and CFI ACSs as they existed at that time. But I think as Phil can tell you, so that gives you some idea of what the instructor one looks like. But as Phil can tell you, there has been a great deal of work since then. So the reason we haven't published it again, and we have not put a draft of it on the FA web page because a lot of that work is still going on, and we want to make sure that that's done before we put it out again. So what you're seeing is probably a much, much earlier version of it.
Okay, so there is no. Go ahead, Phil. You go.
I think the one that's out there is, like Susan said, it was the last draft that came out of the other group that was then given to us to review for what we were doing, and it was floated around. It was definitely made public, but it is a draft, and it's an early draft. There are a lot of changes taking place on it. There are going to be a lot of things that you don't recognize in the final draft. So
as they say, more to come. All right.
Right. That one right now should just be for comment. I wouldn't start the private and the instrument are far enough along. You can probably start making some pretty good plans and only have to make tiny changes at the end, if any. The ACS for the authorized instructor would be to just get a familiarization. If you have issues with it, let me or other folks, AOPA or FAA contacts, know about it so it can get incorporated into the process.
If you go to the next one, the next slide, it has a little bit, it kind of goes to the point you're making. We're targeting June for implementation, and this would be optional implementation of the private pilot ACS and the instrument rating ACS for airplanes. Sometime in the next few months, I expect we're going to publish the ATP ACS for review and comment in the Federal Register. And what the FAA will do, we will open a docket on behalf of the working group and collect comments and then give them back to the working group to continue to revising the document. We're going to do the same thing with the instructor ACS, but we don't have a really a specific time frame on that yet, simply because it's been a very, very complicated thing to do, and the group is taking a lot of time to discuss everything and do it right. And everybody who's on the group that is working the instructor ACS, we have instructors, DPEs, people who have lots and lots of experience in this and keep saying, well, what about? And so that is extremely useful discussion to make sure that we get this critical piece right. One of the things I would encourage you to look out for is when we do publish those documents, when we do open a docket for comment, it's usually 60 days worth of comment. And that is NAFI and AOPA and others have always published that information. And I know not everybody thinks about, oh, gee, I need to go in and comment on it, but that really is a great opportunity for you to look at it and say, well, hey, what about? Because sometimes and one of the reasons we've done so much of this back and forth is we know that it's very easy for people who look at it every day, and we know what we thought and we know what we meant, but if we show it to people who've not been part of that discussion, they say, well, we don't understand. So that's the opportunity to clarify. So our industry partners have been very, very good at publicizing the availability of these documents when they've come out. So just as Bob said, more to come. Keep an eye out for the regular publications, e-publications and magazines, because they will give you notice about when opportunities to comment come up.
Okay. And just to clarify, Fred Stahl asks, June 2016 is optional implementation. Could you clarify that?
We're going to be talking about this in January with a group and figuring out deployment. A lot of our industry partners have asked for a transitional period, so we're looking at how to make the private and the instrument available so that you can use those you can use the documents that we will have published by then for training and everything else. And the knowledge tests are already coded to the ACS for private and instrument. We've already completed that process. So whether you use the PTS or the ACS, but if you use the ACS as the standard reference for training somebody, we believe, we hope, and our prototypes have shown that they're going to be much better prepared than traditionally. So we don't have all the details about that yet, and Phil, I'm giving you a warning. This is one of the things we're going to be discussing in January. But we're going to be trying to make it as smooth a process as possible, but also respect the idea that, well, you can use this. I think about it as the way that the FAA introduced MedExpress. For a while, it was an optional thing, and then eventually, once everybody was accustomed to the look and feel and there weren't any particular bugs, then it went entirely to MedExpress.
And
so
then,
sorry.
Oh, go ahead and finish your statement there, Susan. I'm sorry.
I anticipate that we're going to be trying to do the same sort of thing with the ACS. What we absolutely don't want to do, and this is why we've done so much public comment and the prototyping and events like this one, is to suddenly turn off everything that's familiar and say, "Hey world, here it is. Have a good time." That's not the goal at all.
Okay. And a follow-up from Fred, then we can move on. Will DPEs and inspectors use the PTS or the ACS, or will it be, I guess the question would be, do they have to know which way you went when you present the applicant?
They might, but we're trying really hard to make sure that people know about this. So since for the past year, every GA ops inspector who goes, some of you may know that our GA ops inspectors, they have to go to Dallas quarterly for their own currency flying to make sure that their skills are up to snuff. They have been getting, they're now on their second round of briefings on the ACS, so they already know what it is. We have been working with the the examiner standardization folks in Oklahoma City. They have provided basic information about the ACS to all the designated examiners. The other thing that we're looking to do, we've already got some work going on to develop sample plans of action that DPEs can use and then adapt, kind of the way that was what the FAA did when the sport pilot certificate was introduced. The folks who were working that at the time, they developed sample plans of action just to make it a little bit easier to make the transition. So we're working on that piece as well.
Okay, great. Why don't we move on then?
Okay. Actually, I think if you can go back one slide, there was some stuff on there that I wanted to point out. If you can't go back, I can just tell you, one of the things that one of the criticisms or the concerns, I'll put it that way, one of the concerns that I think all of us have heard is when you look at the ACS, they think, oh my Lord, suddenly I'm going to have a 3-day check ride for a private pilot certificate. That is not the case. We anticipate, and we've got lots of DPEs on the working group. What we're planning is that none of the performance metrics haven't changed. So if that certificate or rating says you have to hold altitude within 100 feet, nobody's changing any of those things. The skill performance section of the practical test should be just like it always is. The difference will be that because when we have the knowledge codes available, the examiner will be able to look more closely, and instead of trying to guess at what somebody missed and ask a lot of questions to narrow that down, it should be more tightly focused. So that one of the reasons, again, we're doing the sample plans of action is to make sure that we help standardize the examiners so that nobody gets a 20-minute check ride, which is not adequate, and nobody gets a 3-day check ride, which is way too much. So, that was a point that I wanted to be sure I made, so that nobody thinks that they're going to be sitting there for a 6-hour oral on the practical. That's not the plan. And now, I don't know, Phil, do you want to take it from here with these last few?
Okay. I got ahead on that one slide. This was going to be how do we have to change, and that's from the examiner's point of view that Susan just talked about, and then also from the applicant and from the instructor. From the applicant's point of view, I think when they use the ACS, it's going to be positive to them, and since most of them initially will have perhaps been in both systems, but pretty quickly once it's running, new students won't have seen the old system for it, and so it won't be a big change. And what's good about it is the much greater clarity of understanding what they have to know, what they have to do, and how they have to go about the risk management. And as a result of that, I think it lets a better interaction between the student and the instructor work together rather than worrying just about passing a test, but really what, as educators, we all want, which is for them to develop an understanding of how the knowledge and the skill and the risk management all fit together in the overall big picture to make safe performance of the task. And so I think the students should be largely unaffected by it, other than the handful that may have to go through a little bit of a transition. On the other hand, with the students, I think like we talked about earlier, for the most part, it should be fairly transparent to the student, especially the ones that have already taken the knowledge test, because there's really not any difference except when it gets down to the coding and the way it's presented. But the tasks they have to do are the same tasks, the standards are the same standards, so anything they've been studying before would apply, anything that's going to come in here would apply. From the instructor, I think probably the most positive thing about this is it's really going to give the instructor the tools, but then in a sense hold them accountable that they need to meet these broader standards, not just memorizing test questions. And I think that's going to overall enhance the relationship between the student and the instructor and the materials that they're using to study by. And the instructor is going to have a pretty good role to play in that, of making sure that they actually understand this knowledge and skill, and also are able to do it within the context of scenario-based activities, and to understand the tasks that are being done. And so I think the instructors will have some work to do. It's not going to be a huge difference, but the part that is going to be the biggest change is probably the one that a good professional instructor would welcome, and that's making sure you're instructing to a broader level of knowledge and understanding, and deepening the understanding of knowledge, skill, and risk management. And then finally, do we have any DPEs on, I know we can't answer that, Bob, but do you recognize any of the names as DPE? I saw a couple.
I am sure we have them. I've seen a few names that I'm familiar with that I know are DPEs, so go for it. I couldn't open the mics tonight. There are just way too many people.
The DPEs, and it's one of the things I've learned too, we're using the term evaluators because there are a lot of other people that evaluate other than just DPEs, depending on where you are, so that's going to be a term you're hearing transition to. But the evaluators, one, you're going to have a plan of action, make sure you cover all that, but of course you do that today. And this, I think, in some ways will give you better tools to develop that plan of action. You're going to have to create better, more focused questions. You're going to have realistic scenarios, because where we've had scenario-based testing up until now for parts of the things, what we're doing now is going to become, the whole thing is to be based around being able to develop scenarios to do all of the testing. The part I think they're really going to like is it's going to be a lot more precise in terms of putting together the information for reviews using the ACS codes. Like we've talked about, the codes are going to be much stronger than the learning statement codes, and should give both the evaluator and the student a lot more to work with to really be able to make it a useful exercise to review those when something has been missed. Okay, any questions there, and then we'll start to wrap up.
Okay, there are, I'm sure Chris Moser's got a couple of questions from his side, but there's one or two that are instructor focused. One person, and I'm scrolling back to it, asked if these codes, if the knowledge codes will bleed over, I'll use that term, to the WINGS program. I can't get to the right term all of a sudden. That is, will everything match up over in the pilot proficiency side in WINGS?
I guess you mean with the profiles?
Right,
with
right.
Profiles.
Yeah.
Eventually, yes, it will. That is that's a piece that we haven't gotten to yet. However, I do want to, when I talked about education efforts earlier, the FAST team is very familiar with this. They've got copies of presentations, and they've started giving seminars on it around the country. And also, there are, I know this is not related to the question about the WINGS program, but there are several of the providers, I think AOPA is one, and a couple of others that I know about, have started including modules about the ACS in flight instructor refresher clinics. So again, it's all about trying to get the word out, but we will get to matching things up with the WINGS program at some point. But right now, we've been too focused on trying to get these basic pieces in place. It's a huge job. It's kind of like trying to build the airplane while we're still flying it.
Yeah, that is a great analogy. And then I'll ask one more, and then I'll turn it over to Chris. We were asked and I know you alluded to it, but how have the trials? How do you feel the trials in Orlando and Seattle have gone?
We have had extremely positive feedback. I was surprised. I was expecting all kinds of rocks to be thrown. First of all, I was expecting some resistance from, maybe from some of the folks in the FSDO, and they saw immediately, because they have a huge flight training unit in Orlando, and they saw immediately the benefit that it could have. So they have been, along with the Seattle FSDO, which are both doing instrument now, they have seen this as a very, very positive development and are fully supporting the industry's prototyping efforts. We have a set of surveys that we do for instructors, applicants, and evaluators, and I don't have any of those in front of me, but we track them on a regular basis, and the feedback has been, yes, this is very positive. We have had people point out things that we may have missed, and we've made some tweaks and changes based on some of the feedback about, well, you could word this a little better, or you could do something better. But as far, I think there was one comment we got early on. This was with a private pilot prototype, and I thought it was kind of interesting. It was, well, I haven't read it, but I don't like it. And that was reported by the industry person who's running the prototype effort on that side, and he said, well, I don't know what to do with that. So, this is a change, and we all know that we're human beings and we don't like for things to change. We prefer the devil we know, generally speaking. So I'm confident that there will be people who say, this is crazy, why are you doing this? But most of us, I think, who really know and care about flight training, we've seen a lot of room for improvement, and this is the best opportunity we've ever had to do it. And it's just been such a privilege to work with so many dedicated people, AOPA, NAFI, so many other groups that you saw on the slide, and then a lot of hugely dedicated colleagues at the FAA. We're all very committed to getting this right.
And that's certainly evident in everything I've seen and heard, and that's great. Chris, since AOPA helped sponsor this one and partnered with us, have you had any questions?
Let's see. Yes, I do. So one of the things I want to say too right off the bat is that when I first came on board at AOPA, I got to speak to David Ord, who I know worked with you guys as well. And when he showed me what the ACS is about, I can testify to the fact, that it is very intuitive. And so when he described to me what it was, I am excited about this because I think it's bringing it all together, making it less disjointed is just such a great way to go. It's much more educationally sound, and I think it is going to be a good thing. Of course, once we get used to it. So it's always scary when you start with something new. One of the things I wanted to ask, I had two follow-up questions. The first one was the fact that, I can remember when I first started instructing, which was back in the early 2000s, and I remember that the front of the PTS then was thick, but it wasn't that bad. And then up till now, where it's like, it seems like the front of the PTS is like, half of what the PTS is. Is there a process you guys are put into place that you've is now there that will prevent this from happening again in the future, where we'll have the ACS and then we'll just keep adding on things to the front and sort of get disjointed? Is there anything that's already kind of designed into this process to help prevent that?
Well, we have a place for everything, and hopefully everything will go in its place. I have a primal need for order in my universe. So there is one of the things we did with the appendix structure is, we're trying to make it we're trying to make it the same across ACSs, so that once you're familiar with the appendix structure, you're going to see the same thing in every, or essentially the same thing in every ACS that you look at. But one of the reasons that the introduction and other things got cluttered up was that there wasn't really a place to put it. Now there is in the appendices. That's exactly how we ended up with such a long list of special emphasis items. It started out as a placeholder, but it never kind of got integrated into the ACS. Now, one of the things that we intend to do over the long term is, once we get past the developmental phase, and we may have to establish a different group to do it. I won't go into the bureaucratics of that, but it's fairly complicated. We intend to maintain some kind of industry consultative group that will meet on a regular basis, hopefully quarterly. And if somebody says, hey, you've got to put this in the ACS, we intend to have that consultation with the group and say, does this really belong here? And if so, where does it go? We're not going to just throw it in with no context. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that absolutely does. That's exactly what I was thinking, was the stuff getting added on. And I think that your comment about that you created a structure now where things can go and how to apply them, I think is maybe a much better way to go, and hopefully it'll prevent it from happening in the future, because it's so easy to overlook things in the front of the PTS that I think that's a much better way to organize it. The other follow-up I had, too, I did see a question early on from...
Chris,
yeah.
Before we move on, let me suggest to Susan, what you spoke about there is sort of an introduction to the quality management system, and we haven't spoken about that. So maybe you want to say a few words about that before we move on.
Yeah, sure. Many of you are probably familiar with QMS, quality management systems. The whole idea is just to make sure that you have a documented, structured way to do things, and that nothing is dependent on tribal knowledge. And I can tell you that up until the last couple of years, there's been an awful lot of tribal knowledge involved, and things don't always get passed down the way that it ought to be. So what we are very, very carefully doing is documenting everything we do. Some of it will be part of a formal QMS process, for those of you familiar with it. Some of it will be work instructions, which are a little bit less formal. But the whole idea is that we do, well, and Phil will be familiar with this because I've said it so many times, this has to work regardless of, it has to work without any of the individuals who are there now saying, oh, well, it should be this way. This will be a success when it works because their process is written down, everybody knows how it works, and it will continue to operate the same way. So that's something that we are working very hard to do.
And that's where something like the GPS issue that I spoke about much earlier would get caught in that, because if NTSB were to make a recommendation and it came in to the first person and they wrote the kind of questions they wrote, it would be subject to this process review where other folks, including the industry group that Susan just mentioned, would get a shot at it to say, hey, wait a minute, that's not practical. That's not what we need to be doing. Here's what we need to be doing. And so I think it would really I think it's going to go a long way to keeping the document from burgeoning out way beyond the size and scope that it is, but staying focused on what it's trying to do.
And Chris, you have
excellent.
one more?
So, I mean, yeah, I do. I just have one more, Bob. And the last question is a kind of a follow-up from somebody that I saw earlier, and also one that I was thinking that I've heard from schools. I kind of mentioned it before with the ground schools, but do you think there's going to be a big change in the need for syllabi that the schools do, and especially, of course, the 141 schools are concerned about that? And if that's the case, is there any kind of planned assistance to help them prepare that, help them transition to the ACS?
We've had that before, and we've looked at it, and we don't believe that there's going to need to be a substantial change to the syllabus, because again, the maneuvers haven't changed. The areas of operation that you're familiar with, there are a couple of areas where there was overlap or duplication. For example, runway safety was a hot topic, still is. But a lot of that, it's not a separate task. It's been folded into other places. But what we're trying to do is build on what was there. One of the descriptions of the ACS is that it's an enhanced PTS. So we don't anticipate that it's going to require any major change in syllabus or training approach, but the ACS will give you a lot more material to develop a more to develop a more comprehensive approach to training. Phil, I know you've done a lot of this, so you might want to add to it as well.
Yeah, I think probably the simplest answer I can give Chris is I think there's two groups, and one group is going to be practically not affected by it. The other group is going to be affected by it depending on how much they've done, and the issue is the scenario-based training. If schools are still doing just straight prescriptive training, that is, just go out, you do takeoff, you do slow flight, you do approaches to stall, you do stall, and it's just maneuver after maneuver, they're going to have to do some changing in their syllabus, or at least the layout of the structure in their syllabus, so that it fits together better into a scenario-based training. The schools that have already been using the FITS programs or their own scenario-based training, I don't think they're going to see much, because the elements are all largely the same as what's in the existing program.
Okay.
All right, that sounds very fair. So,
one more follow-up that I'll ask. Dave Schrader asks, when did the test results have the ACS codes added? And the second part of his question is, will any student have a test report that won't match the ACS? And I think we've already answered that, but just to make sure we're clear on it.
Okay, so we are. I'm hoping that we will have the ability to add the codes to the knowledge test report by June. But if you're familiar with contracting at all and familiar with government contracting, that is not something that, well, there are a lot of hands in that, and I certainly don't have control over it. So it's one of the things that we have to talk about with the working group in January. But one of the things that I've been thinking through about this is, so right now, if, let's say on an instrument rating, somebody misses a question about VOR, and the student remembers, well, I missed, it was something about VOR. Now, instead of having to really guess at it. The ACS gives you a much narrower range of possibilities. So I think that even the ACS will be useful to everybody, even if the codes are not immediately available. So again, the group is working very hard to pull all the stuff together and to move it forward. But that remains to be determined.
Yeah, obviously there's going to be a transition period, and in any transition periods, we're going to find out what's really working and what needs improvement. And it sounds like we have the mechanisms.
And one thing, Bob, just to reiterate, one of the things that we've done, and we're getting in feedback from our working group, when we put the sample tests, internet tests up, and by the way, most of you may realize that those internet tests, they used to be kind of an afterthought, but we are putting a great deal of effort into them now. The test questions that are on the internet, available at that web page that you see on the screen in front of you, the questions on there have been reviewed by the ACS Exam Review Board the same way that live test questions have. And those sample test questions include both learning statement codes and ACS codes, because what we're trying to do is give everybody an idea of how they would, I'm not going to say match up, because, ultimately learning statement codes will just go away, but it kind of gives you an idea of where things go. And we are continuing to modify that, because to be honest with you, we've had to learn how to think about the coding, and the information on that web page provides some information about what is our rationale and how we're looking at it and how we're going. But every time we've posted those sample tests, and so far we've done it 2 different times, 2 different quarters, we get feedback that says, hey, why did you code it this way? Shouldn't it be this? And so we go back and look at it and say, well, maybe you're right. And in other cases we say, no, we did it this way because. So anyway, it's right now, it's a little bit of an iterative process, and we do intend to, through the working group and through public comment, to continue to make as many changes and improvements as possible, because this is never going to be perfect. And because we all know the NAS changes, for example, NDB isn't out there very much anymore. The ACS is going to be a living document. But to go to Chris's point, when we put in new things and technologies are going away, we would take out of those old technologies out.
Okay. Well, we've been here for quite a while. For more information, I see that folks can contact Bob Newell, Manager Airmen Testing Standards. His email address is there, and his phone number. And of course, Susan Parson, who's been very gracious tonight and very patient with us. Thank you very much. And her contact information is there. I can tell. You speak about it with passion. On behalf of NAFI, and Chris, I'll speak for you too, I want to thank the working group for their efforts. This is exciting. It's a bit daunting, but exciting to see it coming, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to teaching it. I'll be teaching this module at a FERC myself come in January. So this is exciting stuff. Chris, do you have any final thoughts before I close it out? Did I lose Chris?
Can you hear me okay?
There you are. Chris, anything?
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah. So I just wanted to say, I do want to thank Susan and Phil for taking the time to do this with us tonight, and for you letting me and having AOPA help you co-sponsor it, because obviously this is something we really care about and we support. And again, I'm the same way. I'm looking forward to, as an instructor too, I'm kind of looking forward to starting to use the ACS. So, because from what I've seen from it, to me, it looks like it just makes sense. And I agree with Susan's comment about the Apple products. I'm an Apple fan myself, and it's all about intuitive, and that's what I've noticed. So, thanks for doing this with us tonight.
And I'll reiterate what Chris said. Thank you very much. For those of you who are AOPA members and not NAFI members, we'd love to have you. Our web address is www.aopa.org. nafinet.org. I'll repeat that, www.nafinet.org. We'd love to have you as a member. E-Mentor and Mentor that Phil alluded to earlier are our electronic and hard copy newsletter and magazine, and a lot of great content. It's all member driven, and we're very proud of the work that our members and our editor, David Hipschman, put into them to produce a quality product. And so we invite you to become members. For those of you that are members, this webinar has been recorded and will be put up and on the website for you to listen to, and also the slides will also be part of the webinar. I apologize again for the technical difficulties. As somebody at Boeing once said, somebody much smarter than me once said, if you can't hide it, paint it red. We had some problems tonight, and mainly because we had overwhelming response. We're used to about 50 people showing up, and we had 4 times that many. So it's the good news is that we had problems. So thank you all for participating. Really enjoyed having you all here tonight, and look forward to having you in future webinars. Phil and Susan, thank you so much for your participation tonight.
Glad to
Appreciate
help.
it.
Thank you.
And for all of you, happy holidays, happy New Year. Fly safe. Teach your students to fly safely, and take care of each other as you fly. Have a good holiday, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks.
Thank you.